Hey folks, today we're talking about something that's very near and dear to me, um, the Murray-Darling River system and its current crisis. I'm Tony, and today we're interviewing Gareth Barber, who has over 2 decades worth of agricultural experience. Uh, Gareth, would you like to say hello to the viewers?
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much, Tony, for the introduction. As Tony mentioned, I have over 20 years worth of experience in the aquaculture industry and related aquatic industries as well. Everything from lakes and wastewater to aquarium stores, display aquariums, places like your Sydney Aquarium, zoos, everything like that. So I have, for the past 14, nearly 18 months, run my own company, Biotech Aquatica, and we specialize in aquaculture consultancy and equipment supply. So essentially everything from one pump right up to an entire system and everything in between for essentially anyone that has an application in water with fish in it.
So to be safe to say that you have a very nuanced knowledge about keeping fish alive in an artificial environment.
The basis of my expertise and the success of a system solely is based on that. So we need to be able to produce water for these animals that support their growth and health and longevity because we're farming fish for a profit, and therefore those fish need to be farmed at a profitable price. And if they're not growing optimally, if they're dying, if we're experiencing losses or anything like that, that is a big hole in the farmer's pocket, a big hole in their bottom dollar. So yes, that is the exact thing that we strive to do in the aquaculture industry, and that is produce the best quality water to grow or support or enhance fish or fish stocks or the environment.
Yeah, so as my understanding, this market is beginning to really boom in places particularly out west of Australia.
Yes and no. There are some places still sticking somewhat around the fringes, but Northern Territory, for example, Humpty Doo barramundi is the one of the biggest or the biggest producer of barramundi for consumption in Australia. The majority of barramundi that you eat through Woolworths will come from Humpty Doo barramundi, for example.
Yeah,
Okay, the
right.
majority of them. Do you remember when the floods were on and the whole of Australia really was cut off? Humpty Doo barramundi was no different. They were actually harvesting fish and flying them out by helicopter.
Yeah, right.
They harvest. They actually last year surpassed a 50-ton per week harvest. So 50,000 kilos of fish per week they produce.
Yeah, so these are in enclosed systems.
In ponds, yes. So
Mm,
so essentially a system. This is a system that has no filtration on it,
mm.
and we're just using the balance of the microbial ecology within the pond to gear it towards fish production. Okay, so there's a very nuanced understanding that we need to have of how bacteria, algae, fish, soil, aeration, oxygen, BOD, and everything interact in order to make sure that these fish grow from our little tiny fry, from after we hatch them from an egg, right up to maybe even a 5 kilo barramundi or a 5 kilo salmon or whatever it might be.
Wow, that's actually incredible.
Yeah.
But there is obviously a distinct market for this, and there is a movement away from river and sea catchment of just regular fishing.
Oh, yes, the aquaculture industry as of don't quote me on this, 2020, 2021, somewhere around there, actually surpassed and continues to surpass wild catch. So we surpass wild catch by catching more. We produce more than 50, we were producing more than 50% of the world's protein consumption of fish and seafood was coming from aquaculture. Now I think that's more like 60-40 or a little
Yeah,
bit
right.
more at the moment. Anyway,
So,
it has for the last 20 years really just been a growth explosion industry. It hasn't dipped. It's always been going up.
so you've been at the right place at the right time for the right industry.
It's a primary producing industry. It's just like farming cattle or anything like this. It was a verging industry 20 years ago, but yes, it has proven itself time and time again, and is a very stable, model for producing food.
Yeah. So how do your particular skills transpose over toward the Murray-Darling River system and its current crisis?
So essentially, in order to produce the best quality water available to an aquatic organism, we need to do a couple of very important things. We need to get rid of the waste, the solid waste. We need to treat the nutrients. We need to ensure there's enough oxygen in the water. And we need to take into account the quality of the water going in, the quality of the water coming out, what our restrictions are for discharge, etc., etc., etc. So although we might be farming fish at 20 kilos per cubic meter in water in a fish farm, there's not going to be that many fish in a river, of course, but the waste problems are the same if we have a large input of waste. And in an aquaculture system, that would be the food that you put into the fish and you get the waste out. In an environmental application like this, it's more runoff and sedimentation and nutrient from farming and livestock and urbanization and everything like that. Replace that, but essentially it's going into the river, affecting exactly the same biological systems that are affected in a aquaculture system, but it's out in the environment, and it's a problem because it's essentially the main vein of Australia.
Yeah,
So
right.
yeah,
Well, without further ado, if you'd like to get into it, let's bring on the next set of questions.
thanks very much, Tony.
What is the importance of the Murray-Darling River system, in your opinion, Gareth?
Well, to keep it short and sweet, we've summarized a lot of information from a lot of different sites, which you'll see links for underneath here. All the information within our presentation, including this information here, is taken from information that the government has produced. So the Murray-Darling River system is over 2,500 kilometres long.
Yeah, right.
It spans through New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia, and almost 2,000 kilometres of that river can be navigated. In other words, you can travel it by boat.
Yeah, so like erosion would be a problem, right?
It can be in a lot of parts, yeah.
Mm.
And at 2,500 kilometres long, there's a lot of riverbank.
Yeah.
So that fact makes it the third longest navigable river on the planet, only after the Amazon and the Nile. Okay,
So she's a
so
biggin.
well, I mean, what you can get from that is it's long and it's deep enough for you to get a boat in and go 2,000 kilometers of its length in a boat, to give
Yeah,
you an idea. Okay, so that's just to give you a gauge of sort of what volume of water we're dealing with here, roughly. Okay, it's at least big enough for a boat for 2,000 of 2,500 of its kilometers. The Murray-Darling Basin that the Murray-Darling River exists in spans more than 1 million square kilometers, making up 14% of the total area of Australia. So that's the catchment, essentially, that the river collects its water from.
yeah, right.
Okay.
So that's 1/6 of all of Australia,
Yeah. Now,
roughly.
I mean, if we didn't have 1/6 of the water that we have available to us now, so that's nearly 20%,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah, that's
that's
huge.
that's a big drop in the amount of available water.
Yeah, so safe to
Just to
say
give you
that
an idea, it's important. It's
yeah.
important. Um, the Murray River provides water to approximately 1.5 million households, as well as a vast amount of farms and other businesses along its length as well. Okay.
Yeah, well, Australia's population is roughly I think 28 million, so 1/28th of all people receive water from that source.
And you've got to remember that the majority of the river itself is not actually populated. Okay, it's in outback Australia. There's a lot of room. There's a lot of distance between towns, even if the towns are close to the Murray Darling or the Murray
Mm.
or the Darling. So it's that it makes it even more significant
Yeah, but
because it just
I'm
goes to show
guessing,
that, yeah, we use it for a lot of water.
yeah, and I'm guessing that a lot of that is obviously agricultural based, for providing water inland.
Yeah. So the land that isn't, you know, overly suitable for, dense population or urbanization, generally speaking, is farmland. As long as it's suitable for farmland, obviously they need availability to water for more intensive farming practices like broadacre cropping or livestock, cattle, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that that's
Yeah,
what we refer to as the Australian food bowl is the Murray-Darling Basin.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's safe to
yes.
say that it's incredibly important.
Well, it's $45 billion important annually in food production and hospitality and tourism. So if that gives you an idea of a monetary value to exactly how important it is, it's to the tune of $45 billion with a B, billion.
But
So yeah, it's big.
yeah, that's an incredible number. That's
Hmm.
that'd be a huge part of the Australian budget.
Yeah, yeah. And that's with the current state it's in too, by the way.
Yeah. Oh
This is what
well,
we need to remember. This is the current state it's in, and it's worth $45 billion annually.
Gareth, what is the crisis that Murray-Darling is currently facing?
Well, the Murray-Darling River system faces a lot of different issues. So it's not just one. Um, and all of the information about all of these issues can be found at the link that you see in bold on the second line on the screen there. But essentially, what we have done is we have summarized that as well as provided some more in-depth knowledge for people that may not particularly understand these terms, what they mean.
Yeah.
It's very hard to sift through the jargon and find the information. So, I mean, we've been working on this for 4 months, I think, Tony, and this is like, it's been a long process of research to try and actually find this information,
Yeah, correct.
as well as knowing from common knowledge, as well as my experience in the industry and so on and so forth. So, the first one that people would be mostly familiar with is blackwater events, and these, in particular, blackwater events, people became aware of them when we experienced a lot of bushfires, especially around Black Wednesday and things
Yeah.
like that in Melbourne, in Victoria. And black bushfires are obviously uncontrollable. Okay, they're an uncontrollable event mostly, and it's an environmental thing that happens. It's mostly uncontrollable. Okay, but what we need to remember is blackwater events are caused by more than just bushfires. Okay, so the blackwater event that people are referring to after the bushfires is because the water physically became black because of the color of the ash that was running into it. But the
Yeah.
overall effect was it sucked the oxygen out of the water. Okay, so when people also term a blackwater event, it can be termed as a hypoxic event that essentially resulted in the oxygen being drawn out of the water to a point where it couldn't sustain life. Okay,
So you're saying that there are other Blackwater events that don't look like
black.
ash black because it's not made by a bushfire.
Yeah, the blackwater, I would. Okay, so a good way to think about it, okay, is do you know the term grey water from your washing machine and things like that? People have grey water systems that they can water onto their lawns and things. Okay,
Yeah.
you can imagine black. If green is good, okay, or if white is good, then black is bad. All right, so black water essentially is just something that you can't really sustain any life in. All right,
Yeah.
it needs treatment. It needs help to become healthy again.
All
Okay.
right. So these Blackwater events are created by bushfires and what else actually elicits
So
this event to happen?
it could be, well, the end result is essentially the oxygen gets sucked out of the water and the organisms in the water that require oxygen can no longer survive. Okay. So that can be anything from excess sedimentation and buildup of solid waste.
Hmm.
It could be a change in the thermocline, which takes very water that's very lacking in oxygen to the top. Okay, and the warmer water goes to the bottom, and the thermocline essentially rolls and switches. That can cause huge issues. When an algae bloom crashes, that can cause huge issues. When there's excess nutrient in the water that's fueling a really heavy algae bloom, which we'll go into later on in slides down the track,
Hmm.
when that algae then goes into respiration at night instead of photosynthesis during the day, they then start to suck the oxygen out of the water and produce CO2. And that creates a hypoxic event, which results in a quote unquote black water event, which is essentially just water that has, from a number of different issues, had the oxygen sucked out of it that it
Hmm.
wouldn't usually experience.
Yeah. So in the agricultural, aquaculture industry, how
Yeah.
often does this actually occur?
In the aquaculture industry, we try not to let it occur at all. So there are obviously events such as, okay, so there's a couple of different farming methods.
Hmm.
They can broadly be broken up into extensive and intensive. Extensive obviously mean, okay, so like an extensive as having 1,000 head of cattle and just letting them roam across your property.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that's extensive. All right. Intensive would be taking all of those cattle and putting them into a feedlot,
Oh, okay. Yep. Yep. Into a controlled.
intensifying the food, maximizing and getting the best quality food into them, enough water, everything like that, in a feedlot for high production. Okay.
Yeah.
Same thing with aquaculture, but it's more extensive, very low stocking density in a pond without filtration, and intensive in a system in tanks inside where we can control the environment, as well as the fact that we have a much higher stocking density. Okay. So
So there are controls in the environment that you monitor and take care of to provide the best
exactly.
quality for the aquaculture fish.
For example, in an extensive application like a pond, so
Mm.
essentially a hole in the ground, whether it's got a liner or whether it's earth and bottom, whatever it is, whether you're farming prawns or fish or whatever it might be, generally speaking, in a nutshell, farmers try to get a balance between a bacterial bloom and an algae bloom, so the algae can produce oxygen for the fish. And then they also have paddle wheels, which are aerators, which
Hmm.
splash the water around and put oxygen into the water as a safeguard to back that up. Okay. They then, if it's overcast and they know they're going to have a couple of overcast days and they're at the end of their production, so their algae bloom's really thick. Okay, that can really impact, if it's overcast, it can really impact the amount of oxygen in the water. So they have to artificially add oxygen into the water with chemicals or with pure oxygen gas or whatever it might be. Now, if they don't catch that and they don't monitor these things and know what the effects are, or the cause, the effects of the cause of a lack of oxygen, the more they can mitigate that, the better their production will be.
So essentially, these aquaculture farmers find this balance between an algae bloom and all the other bits and pieces that are in there,
Yeah.
and they monitor this
Yes.
to keep it at such a safe level.
Multiple times a day, they're monitoring DO, or dissolved oxygen,
Yep.
because that's the most important parameter. But they're also trying to balance it so they don't get really big pH swings, really big swings in oxygen and CO2. They want to create a stable environment if they
Well,
can.
so
So they're,
clearly they've got a handle on this because if we're
yeah.
talking about it like properly and particularly businessly speaking, the wild catch versus the agricultural catch, like the agricultural farming, is that they have a 50-50 split at the moment.
They did in 2018, 2016, 2018, 2019. Ever since then, aquaculture has produced more aquatic protein, more seafood for human consumption than wild catch has
So they
since
really have a handle on this. They really understand the
aquaculture.
biodiversity and
Yeah.
the ecology of the system itself that keeps fish viable for sale.
This balance between algae blooms and water quality and everything like that, the Japanese and the Chinese, they were practicing this thousands, over 3 to 5 thousand years ago in
So it's
aquaculture.
certainly not new. It didn't
This is
just
not
come
a
down in the
new
last
industry.
shower.
No, and even back then with their limited technology, they knew that at night, if the water's really green, their fish are going to suffer. if it's really good. But if they do a water change and they dilute that a little bit, or they back off on the food, or they try and keep their pond a little bit cleaner, maybe their algae won't get as bad, or they'll be able to control it a little bit better. Or if it's coming up and they've got a lot of fish in there, maybe it's time to harvest them and grade them to lower the stocking density of the pond. Like, this is all, it's all interconnected with a knowledge of water chemistry and how biology interacts in the environment and in an aquatic environment, whether it be artificial or natural.
So clearly, there is a major imbalance in the Murray-Darling River system.
Oh, yes. We know this. We know there is a major imbalance in the Murray-Darling River system. We know that it's not the way the river system was, especially before the colonization of the white man in Australia,
Hmm.
back in 1800s. So this is a problem. We're monitoring constantly blue-green algae blooms and water quality incidences, fish kills, everything like that, on a constant basis. We know it's an issue. We have known it's an issue for many, many, many years.
So in covering more of these things, considering other things that are like beyond our control, i.e., drought, for instance,
Yes. So
what are the knock-on effects of those kinds of events for the river, its health itself?
so if we take into account, and you'll be able to apply this to any of the other things that I bring up after drought. Okay, so
Mm.
imagine that you have two rivers that are separated by 100 kilometers. One is a pristine river, okay, and one has had 50 years worth of runoff from farms and fertilizer and erosion, and it's a messy sort of river, even if it's flowing really well. Okay, a couple of years goes by, drought comes, water flows decrease significantly. Okay.
Hmm.
One river that is perfect is still, the water flows low, but it's still got good quality water flowing through it, and the river's really healthy, so it's not suffering too badly. And in essence, the holes in the pools and the depth of the river overall is a lot deeper on average, because it's not clogged with sediment that's been building up over the last 50 to 100 years or more. Okay.
Mm.
River number two that has had, agricultural inputs, sediment, waste runoff from urbanization, whatever it might be. Once the water flow starts to decrease, that river was already way behind the eight ball while the river flows were good.
Yeah.
So once drought kicks in and river flows start to drop, not only do the pools dry up quicker because they've got physically less volume because they've got more sludge in the bottom of them.
Hmm.
Okay. But the water quality itself, the amount of oxygen the water holds, the amount of algae and everything in the water is so much more than a river that doesn't have these elevated nutrient issues, that when the water flow stops, the impacts of those elevated levels of nutrient from the algae growth, from the increased level of sediment over the years and everything, bad things happen a lot quicker in a water body that's already, 5 steps behind where it should be, compared to a water body that's still able to maintain its own health, because it doesn't have the input of nutrient and runoff from land or anything like that.
Yeah, right. So
That sort of
what
aspect.
is that actually called?
Elevated nutrient levels.
Is that I believe stratification?
Well, yes and no. So stratification can occur, definitely, when water flows get low or when elevated nutrient levels occur. And that is predominantly to do with the algae blooms that occur after that. So the elevated levels causing the algae blooms, which does,
Oh, so
as I say there,
that's the knock-on effect further on down the line.
yes, to produce it essentially, you know results in a significant reduction in water quality. And that leads on to a lot of other things, including stratification, because the algae bloom blocks the sunlight from getting down lower into the water column, which would usually heat the water levels of the water up, right? But
Mm.
the algae bloom's so thick that it can't get down there. And because all of the oxygen's up the top, everything's living up there, and there's no oxygen down the bottom. So no oxygen, no heat. It's just inhospitable. And that is one cause of elevated nutrient levels. the one symptom, I should say, of elevated nutrient levels, but not the cause. Okay, so um, moving on from drought and how, because all of these other things are obviously compounded by drought as well. If all these other things, so this is algae and elevated
Well,
nutrient
there's
levels is
exactly
only one
nothing that
cause.
exactly nothing that the human race can do to stop drought at the moment.
Exactly. But there is many things that we can do to minimize the effects of drought by minimizing our impact and reversing what we've put into the system that's making the effects of that drought even worse for the
Mm,
things that are living in the river. So another one of those, and this is a big one, okay, is sediment buildup from excessive biomass growth from increased nutrients. So what do I mean by that? Well, increased nutrient again fuels all sorts of growth of plants, whether it's algae, whether it's blue-green algae or cyanobacteria, like blue-green algae is, whether it's excess plant growth. But what happens is ultimately these plants die because they crash and we experience die-offs, and all that biomass falls to the bottom. Okay.
yeah,
And what happens is that then adds to the sediment load. And because that area where all that stuff is falling is devoid of oxygen and doesn't have any oxygen and is really cold because it's stratified in a lot of places, nothing lives down there. So the sediment doesn't get broken down. It just re-releases the stuff that's bound up in its cell structure, and all the solids just settle on the bottom and create more sludge. So what that does is it chokes the biological filtration system of the river. Okay, so good bacteria that we want to process nutrient and things like that live on surfaces in the river. So that's boulders and gravel on the bottom and trees and sticks and twigs. And, on the bottom of a river, you would imagine, there might be some mud, there might be some silt and things like that. But generally, you're going to have gravel and boulders and all sorts of other stuff kicking around.
mm,
When you smother all that out and the bacteria no longer have access to oxygen, what's filtering the water? What's taking the waste out of the water? What's taking the ammonia and the nitrite out of the water? What's, stopping the algae from growing and out competing the algae for the nutrient by digesting it before it becomes a problem? Well,
yeah,
when you put sediment on top of these things, it doesn't happen. And that's
yeah.
one of the major problems.
So unless you go swimming in the river itself, like snorkeling or scuba diving, it's really an invisible problem from the outside just looking in.
Well, that particular one down on the bottom, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep,
But it's obviously an issue, but it's not something to be really like it's not a headliner if you don't go and look for it yourself. Like if you're just
exactly.
enjoying the riverbanks on a
Yeah.
regular stroll, you wouldn't notice that this would be a problem.
Exactly. Now, the same thing any farmer would know if they haven't cleaned their dam out for 10 years, 15 years, and they go down there and they clean it out, 9 times out of 10, unless they've got an aeration system in there or by chance the pond, the dam's just really healthy ecologically, chances are there's going to be a huge amount of sediment in the bottom of that dam. And that's from algae dying off. That's from nutrient levels from the cattle drinking out of it and adding nutrient to it and the algae blooming up. That's from, waste runoff from sedimentation and everything. Same thing happens in a river. Okay. This
Yeah.
is not a new concept. This happens all the time. So it's sedimentation and erosion, just like happens in any river. But this is the end result. It suffocates one of the main natural filtration processes of the river.
Yeah, so that basically reduces its BOD, right?
The ability for a river to filter it does reduce the BOD, yes. So when we smother that out, BOD or biological oxygen demand increases.
Yep.
So then,
Oh, the demand increases because the life is now gone, and
correct.
to try and keep the life alive, it still needs to be able to breathe.
That's correct. Exactly. So by the increased sediment reduces the dissolved oxygen overall, as well as overall reduced dissolved oxygen throughout the system. Um, and this all results in an increased level of BOD, and that is biological oxygen demand. And to explain BOD in simple terms, BOD or biological oxygen demand is the amount of oxygen a body of water or anything needs to remain healthy and sustain itself. Okay. Biological oxygen demand is artificially increased by increased amount of solid waste in the water, increased sediment, low water flow, increased temperature, all of the above. Okay. And once you start adding these things on top of each other, things start to steamroll and compound very quickly.
So
This is only half the story so far.
yeah, yeah, it seems like the issues are manifold and compounding. In that once you get one thing going wrong, it seems to have a knock-on effect of creating other problems that are symptomatic of the cause.
Yes. So the sixth point is that exact next step. So what happens after all of these things start to happen, start to compound, one
Mm.
on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, we can have and have experienced a lot fish kills from reduced water quality and in particular dissolved oxygen, low dissolved oxygen. Okay. So reduced water quality could be increased amounts of ammonia, decreased pH, increased amount of CO2, um, increased amount of solids, salts, heavy metals, salinity, all of these things. And low oxygen obviously is caused by all of the problems that we've gone into above. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one cause. So now we're into the symptoms. Okay. So we've gone through all the causes that are leading up to this. Now we're into the symptoms. So what happens is we get a
So we
fish
got we
kill.
got yep.
Okay. Then before, during, or after, or all of the above, an increased growth of nuisance algae.
Yeah.
This includes cyanobacteria. So cyanobacteria is what we call blue-green algae. Okay, cyanobacteria is actually it's a photosynthetic bacteria. So it's like an algae, but it's also a bacteria. So it can grab nutrient by itself and eat it like we can, but it can photosynthesize and maintain itself via sunlight like a plant can. It's
Yeah,
like
right. So it does a bit of both.
it's like a weird mutant hybrid. Yeah. There's a couple of different types. Blue-green algae is one. Spirulina is actually a good type of cyanobacteria. That's another type of blue-green algae. There's a red slime bacteria, a cyanobacteria in marine aquariums that a lot of marine aquarists will be familiar with. That's also a cyanobacteria, but it's red, not blue.
Hmm.
There's thousands of different types of cyanobacteria and thousands of different types of algae in general. Okay.
But the ones we're talking about are the ones that have large oxygen demands,
all of
right?
them all of them increase the biological oxygen demand of the water, because as the nutrient increases in the water, the algae can grow more. Okay.
Hmm.
So that increases the oxygen demand on the water. Now during the day while they're photosynthesizing, not so much, but it's in a certain area of the water, which we'll go into when we look into stratification.
Hmm.
But at night, as I said, they start to respire, they start to consume the oxygen and produce CO2. So the oxygen goes down while the CO2 goes up. CO2 has a sedating effect. Okay.
Hmm.
Just like with us, if the CO2 levels are too high, we start to yawn and we get tired in a room or in a car. Okay. But what also happens is when CO2 bonds with water, it drops the pH. So you've got a drop in oxygen, an increase of CO2, and a drop simultaneously as well in pH. So this just shocks the fish and all of the ecology in the system completely when that happens. Okay.
Yeah, right. So it's like a chemical bombardment.
Yeah. Yep. It's just, okay, here's one thing that go wrong. Oh, wait, here's another two. Good luck, essentially. So when that happens, we have a fish kill. So the fish die off.
Hmm.
They float to the top and die, and then eventually they rot and sink to the bottom if they're not removed. Okay. Then we have blue-green algae, algae in general, macroalgae, hair algae, nuisance plant growth. Like, for instance, if anyone's familiar with the Maclay River, the Maclay River is overrun by a plant called Alodia. Alodia was a plant that was available in Australia and has now been declared a noxious pest. The
Yeah, right.
Maclay is overrun by Alodia, but hardly a speck of algae in it. But areas that should be 10 meters deep are about 3 meters deep because the weed mat is so thick. Okay.
Oh,
That increases sedimentation. Now, when you get a crash, all right, for various reasons, all that biomass that I've been talking about, whether it's fish, plants, algae, the various different sorts of algae, that dies off and sinks to the bottom, which further compounds the issue. Okay. That sedimentation then, as we've been talking about, goes into and contributes to a reduction in overall water volume because obviously you're increasing the amount of sediment on the bottom that displaces the water and decreases the
So
amount of
essentially,
water in the
everything that
river.
sinks to the bottom keeps on raising the riverbed up higher, changing the entire structure of the river.
Yeah, and simultaneously smothering out the natural biological filtration capacity of the river itself. So it's reducing the water volume plus then taking out the ability for the river to clean itself as well. So it's very effective at what it does. Sedimentation. Um, the reduction of water volume that then reduces habitat overall for aquatic organisms. And overall, the water quality for the system suffers. So the water quality reduces in general. Okay, that reduces from things like we've talked about, excessive algae growth, die off of plants and algae, and sedimentation and things like that. Plus, bouncing around of water parameters and everything else that occurs when all these problems happen.
So what about natural floods that come through the area? Is that even helpful?
Obviously, floods are going to wash away some things,
Yeah.
whether it's a flood that's coming down through a tributary, whether it's a flood that's coming down the Murray-Darling itself, whether it's all of the above. So you are going to get some flushing of the river. Okay.
Yeah.
So before colonization of Australia, when the native nomadic Aboriginals were the ones that inhabited Australia and their population was by comparison to today, very scarce. Okay, very spread out, not high density population at all. Okay,
Essentially low impact population level.
very much so.
Mm.
The amount of native animals in Australia probably outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. It's so when we had build up of waste and things in the river, it built up to a point where, when a flood came through, it was actually able to clean itself out fairly effectively. And yeah, it was effective. But if you then build up sedimentation and nutrient and stuff into a river, plus decrease the growth of macrophytes and other stuff along the riverbank that causes further erosion.
Mm.
Um, if you have a flood that takes away 3 years of sedimentation, but there's 15 years of sedimentation still there, you haven't got anywhere. It's just that sediment, like the sedimentation that still occurs, the sedimentation still coming in that isn't being treated, that is at a higher level than what it would have been naturally before colonization occurred.
Mm.
And any sediment that does get moved from its place just gets washed further downriver. And when the river gets wider and deeper, the velocity of the water drops, and that water just that sediment that's in that water just settles back out in a deeper portion of the river. Eventually, some of it might find its way to the ocean. Eventually,
Mm-hmm.
but I think we would all be pretty surprised at how much sediment there would be in the Murray-Darling River system if you calculated it on a very conservative basis.
Yeah. So flushing the system, even like natural floods, sounds to me like it just kind of passes the problem along downriver until it actually does reach the ocean.
It passes a very small percentage of the problem along, whilst and adding it to problems further on down the river that already exist. Plus, it leaves behind the massive majority of the percentage of that problem, so it hasn't actually achieved anything. Um, in order for it to have any sort of effect, you'd probably have to have the Murray-Darling River in flood for about 12 months continuously at very high flows to flush that river of the waste that's built up in it. But then again, where's all the waste going? It's still then going into the river, into
Mm.
the ocean. It's not being sequestered. It's not being put back into carbon. It's not being put back into growth of aquatic plants or, structure along the bank or anything like that. It's just flushing it straight out to the ocean. It's not doing anything with it. It's not treating it.
It's not treating any of the problems or the
It's not
symptoms.
treating any of the
It's just
problem.
passing all the symptoms along.
Yes. And that's the symptom. And some of the cause, But if you're not treating the cause in the first place, it's just going to replace itself over time. Even if you do get rid of it manually, you need something in there to treat it constantly because there's a constant input of nutrient and waste, and therefore there needs to be a constant output of nutrient and
Yes, well,
waste.
we up here in far north Queensland have similar knock-on effects with the Great Barrier Reef, with local farmers in agriculture having their nutrients flow out to the barrier reef and causing a number of issues, even in the wider water, no longer in the river system.
Yeah, that's right. And this is why farmers and especially the aquaculture industry, I think, is potentially more heavily regulated in regards to discharges than the agriculture industry is. Because we're farming fish in the water and it's essentially nutrient soup by the time we're finished growing the fish, and we then treat that water through a variety of processes before we discharge it. And we try and reuse as much as we can too. So what happens is we have very strict discharge limits, but it's been happening for so long, and a lot of other industries have very strict discharge limits now too. But it's been happening for so long that the damage has been done. Um, and the more that our population increases, even though our discharge limits are strict, if you have five, companies discharging a little bit, but then you have a million other people apart from that also discharging that little bit, it all adds up very, very, very quickly. And that's where the problems occur. And that's probably an indictment also of wastewater technology and the requirements to treat the water better before it's discharged into the environment.
Hmm.
That's another story entirely. But yes, it definitely compounds, and it's not treating the cause. And our population isn't getting any smaller, so the problem is not only going to continue, it's going to get exponentially worse if we don't do anything about it.
So it sounds to me that there is a industrial situation that is causing this issue, and there needs to be some version of industrial help to help
It
reverse the problem.
Yeah, look, industry is definitely a part of it. Okay, so the runoff from production processes like agriculture, whether it be broadacre cropping or livestock or whatever it might be, sheep or cattle or whatever, regenerative farming practices are helping a lot with that, and they are teaching that in agriculture now. Regenerative farming is a big thing. It's actually more beneficial to you anyway, and produces better results. But I digress. It's part of it, but it's not the only reason for it. Urbanization is another thing. We need
Mm.
room to live. Our population isn't getting smaller. We need room to live, but we also need to produce food. So this isn't by any means an attack or a criticism of farming practices that aren't aquaculture. You know, all farming processes have waste outputs that need to be treated. And if they're going into these systems, then they're all contributing to it. And we need food. There's no
Mm.
way we can get enough food from the wild to support our population. We need to farm it. But if we're expecting our river system to cope with an artificially increased amount of nutrient and waste, we need to be able to apply something that's then going to enable that river system to process that artificially increased level of waste. And that indeed needs to be a industrial approach. Definitely.
Beautifully
This
said.
is this is not a small system. It's not a small problem, and it's not going to be a small solution.
Welcome back, everybody. We've got Gareth here at the helm. I'm Tony, and we're going over the Murray-Darling Basin. In this particular part, we'll be going over the New South Wales data, and we'll be getting Gareth to describe and illuminate what is actually going on here. Um,
Guys,
G'day, Gareth.
thank you very much, Tony. Thanks, guys, for having me back. Okay, so the last slide that we talked about the different issues, and over the last couple of slides, we've gone over the different issues impacting the Murray-Darling River.
Yeah, the preceding events and the the effects of what the crisis is causing.
Exactly. Right.
So
So
what we're looking at is we went over the symptoms.
correct. And these are all symptoms that are, at the root of it caused by increased nutrient and increased waste input into the river system. Okay. So
Which we discussed is not likely to decline because industry does need to be where it is.
and population is where it is, and we need access to water, and generally speaking populations gathered around sources of water,
Mm,
rightly so, smartly so. But we talked about a compounding effect, and we're talking about the compounding effect of the symptoms that we're seeing downstream, as well as the causes compounding downstream as things happen, like floods and things like that. And this is an excellent representation of those compounding issues. Okay, particularly in regards to both fish kills
hmm.
and algae blooms. And it's important to note that fish kills are fish kills. Okay, it kills everything. Um, Hard to miss, right? Algae blooms. The right hand side graph is only representing blue green algae.
Yeah,
Okay, which is a very, very good indicator of very high nutrient and a very bad environment and very bad water quality. The other algae species blooming, like we've talked about, if we were to record all those, that I reckon that right hand side of the map would just be green and red. So,
yeah,
okay, so it's important to note that even with the density of dots in the right hand side graph, that is only blue green algae, just because blue green algae has toxins in it and it's a health risk and we need to monitor it.
yeah. So that
Okay.
doesn't cover all other cyano bacteria.
Cyanobacteria, any algae, any hair algae, any single cellular algae, anything like that.
All
And we'll
right,
go
so
into a different couple of types in a couple of later
yeah,
slides.
sure. So these were pulled from the Parliament of New South Wales, from the Parliamentary Research Service.
Yes,
Are you able?
they do an
Yeah,
what's called a publication called the Issues Backgrounder, and this was from number 2 in July 2019, around the time of when the many fish kills and things like that.
yeah.
Okay, so this is
So
up.
they're
This is
collating the data
2019.
and they're aware of something actually happening.
Yeah, well, as we can see from the graphs and the pictures, so we'll start on the fish kills on the left hand side. All right,
Yep.
so you can see that we have 4 different time periods on the right hand side, and the keys under those time periods enable you to see the size of the fish kill, indicated by the size of the dot that is present. The four periods of time are before 1960, 1960 to 2008, so 48 years, 2009 to 2017, so 8 years, and 2018 to 2019. So you can see that the brackets of time that we have decrease in time exponentially as we get further on in history and further down the line of the history of the Murray-Darling River. Okay.
So it shows that they've been monitoring the situation, but they've also been seeing an increase in fish kills over the last 60 odd years.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, 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 yes. So before 1960, you can see there are a few dots there that would indicate the recorded fish kills before 1960. There aren't very many about. Okay.
No, but they are in those hotspots.
They are. That could be due to a couple of things. It could be due to just population, that there wasn't as wide a population across as many areas of the Murray-Darling River. It's more than likely to do with the actual collection and collating of the data, as well as things like monitoring in remote areas that wouldn't have been a thing back then that is now.
Yeah,
So
well, you're only going to get data from places you go to collect the data.
yes, but having said all of this, the remaining data supports the fact that there's still not very many fish kills before 1960. Okay, so we
Yeah,
can see that from this graph. There's a couple in the middle of New South Wales here. That's about it. That's all I can really see. Okay,
yeah.
in the middle, in one of the tributaries of the Murray-Darling River system. Um, So from 1960 to 2008, which is a period of 48 years, the yellow dots you can see at the start of the Murray-Darling River, and then as they increase down the Murray, where it meets the Darling and then comes into the Murray-Darling River, that we have one, a compounding effect as it starts near the Queensland border,
Yep.
but then goes down and starts to increase in both size and frequency as it goes along, where it meets the Darling River and turns into the Murray Darling and then continues along, towards the
So
border.
it follows at the top, down along the
Mhm.
left, and then heading back down along the bottom of Victoria towards the right. You see the larger yellow dots
Yes.
indicating larger fish kills.
And you can also see the tributaries that flow in or out of of the Murray-Darling River, that there are also fish kills there as well. So whether or not it's bad water quality that's flowing, that's further compounding and flowing into the Murray-Darling, or whether that tributary is flowing out of the Murray-Darling and it's already got all those compounded issues. Either way, it's a problem. Okay.
Yeah, and it's important to note that the largest dot there is in a magnitude of hundreds of thousands in a
Correct.
fish kill.
And there's one of those there, and the next size dot down there is quite a few. The next two size dot downs there is quite a few, from thousands to tens of thousands, which aren't numbers to balk at either. They're significant.
Yeah.
If
Well,
you
how
said
much
to
would
an
100,000 fish weigh?
okay, so well, 100,000 fish. If you put each fish at a kilo, that's 100 tons. If they're half a kilo each, or 500 grams, which would be considered plate size,
Hmm.
just for people's reference at home, 4 to 500 gram fish is considered a plate size. That would be 50 tons if it's 100,000 fish. Now, 50 tons is 50,000 liters. So if you are playing at home and you have a 50,000 litre pond or a 40,000 litre pond or something, go outside, look at pool, sorry, pond. I've got aquaculture on the brain, sorry. Pool, swimming
Well,
pool.
good. We need you there.
Yeah, right. It's kind of important that I stay here. But you go outside, you got a 25,000 litre pool or a 50,000 litre pool, and you imagine taking all the water out of that and filling that up with dead fish, and that's what 100,000 fish at 500 grams looks like.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we're talking in the magnitudes of today's issue in the millions of fish.
That's an estimate too. You got to imagine they didn't really go and count every single fish. There would have been fish that would have died and decayed in that time. There would have been fish that got swept down river that wouldn't have been able to be counted.
Hmm.
Um, the compounding issue that I'm getting at is whether it's flowing into or out of the Murray-Darling, it's the Murray-Darling basin and its tributaries which flow in and out of the Murray-Darling, which contribute to or further compound the issue into or out of those tributaries. So we're not just talking about the Murray-Darling river system here. We're talking about every river system that's connected to it, because every river system that goes into it further compounds the waste issue, and every river system that comes out of it has obviously got all the issues of all the Murray-Darling river system and its tributaries beforehand flowing into it.
Yes.
So it's not like we can just focus on the Murray-Darling river system here. It's all the tributaries that flow into and out of it are also important, because that's where urbanization is coming from as well. The water's got to go somewhere, and all roads lead to the ocean,
Yes.
essentially, for lack of a better description. Um, So moving onwards into the next time bracket, so we've gone from 48 years in the period of 1960 to 2008 to 80 years in the period of 2009 to 2017. Now, if we look at the red dots, we will see that there are quite a few red dots up near the Queensland border that then flow into the Murray River. There is a very big red dot slightly down just south of the New South Wales border, which then continues on, and you can see that there are a number of red dots increasing in number and frequency, moving along that same path as the yellow dots did. Now, the most important thing to realize here is that I would say that in frequency and size, we're probably looking at maybe 30% less data points on that map, Tony.
Yeah.
But it's in a period of 8 years, not 48.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's about 20% of the time period, and we've only got 30% less than a 48-year period beforehand in eight
Yeah.
years. That's pretty significant, I would say. It shows that not only the compounding issue is there, but that also the fish kills are increasing in number and
Yes.
size and frequency over a period of years. Now, in the period of 2018 to 2019, we can see that there's very few dots. There's a few up near the Queensland New South Wales border. There's a couple of big ones at Menindee, which is where all the publicity, or everything came from. This all came to light, things like that. But you can see another couple of grey dots down further in the river system. Now, again, much, much, much less data points, but this is literally in the space of 1 year now.
Yeah, you're talking about
Okay.
12 months.
Now, you times that by 8, the amount of dots there on there by 8, and you'd have something that's representative of the 2009 to 2017 time period. You times it by 48, and I guarantee that entire map would nearly be grey.
Yeah,
If
right.
you worked on the same frequency, I'm saying here,
Yeah,
right? So the
exactly. Yeah,
same
because
frequency and
it's
number.
becoming compounded. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
It's the
compounding the issue.
compounding option, and it's increasing in intensity exponentially as things move further down, because it'd only be getting better if we stopped the waste and the nutrient upstream and at all points along the river going into the river, and that's not possible. We
Yes.
can't do this. So yes, it's plain to see from that data that that is what's happening. Okay, whether it's flowing into or out of all of the rivers and tributaries of the Murray-Darling River system, including the Murray-Darling River itself,
Yep.
is suffering from these issues. Now, you'll notice that there's no data points north or west of the New South Wales border.
Yeah, it dips a little bit into the no, actually it does not. It follows the Victorian border as well. So this is only the data from New South Wales.
Correct. We're not talking about data from Queensland, and we're not talking about data from Victoria either.
Yet it
Now,
affects all of that plus South Australia.
Now the majority, yeah. So now the majority of the Murray-Darling River flows in and around through New South Wales, as we can see. There's a big area there,
Hmm.
but as water continues down through the Murray-Darling River, can you imagine how bad it is from the data in Victoria that we haven't looked at? We're just looking
Well,
at New
yeah,
South
we're
Wales here.
seeing flow on from Queensland down into New
Uh,
South Wales, and now we're going to have all of New South Wales flow into
oh,
Victoria.
now look, this isn't a dig at Victoria. Okay, I love Victoria almost as much as I love not going anywhere. Okay. Um, but it looks like, unfortunately, Victoria might be the end of the pipeline in regards to the sewage treatment works in that analogy, because they're getting the worst of
They're
everything.
getting the raw end of the stick.
Yeah. Ooh, at that point, I don't even think there is a stick. I think it's just a bucket. But yeah.
All right. So
Um,
if you could explain to the viewers here how the data on the left correlates to the data on the right.
So the data on the right here shows the intensity of blue-green algae blooms in the Murray-Darling River system. And that is algae alerts as of the 1st of July 2019. So it was last updated, algae alerts, between the 7th of May 2019 and the 20th of June 2019,
That's a month
and a bit.
and a bit.
Yeah, give or take. So
What, roughly 6 weeks?
roughly. So
And this is
so now
right.
what we need to realize here is that the fish kills are the symptom of the absolute last thing that will happen before catastrophic failure. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is, we're just looking at fish kills. We're looking at when the river goes, I no longer have anything left in the tank. It's all up to you. I'm giving up. And that's when you get a fish kill when a hypoxic event occurs and everything's just going not in the favor of things that need to live in the water.
Hmm.
Now, algae will bloom in different intensities, as we will see by the red, amber, and green dots that indicate their intensity along the river system of the Murray-Darling and its tributaries, as well as this is only over the portion of 6 weeks, not over since before 1960, like we see on the left-hand side. Okay, so
So
in the
this
space
data is
of
more correlative to the 2018, 2019 on the left. This is the 2019 map of a 6 week period in New South Wales for
of a
algae
6 week
levels.
period in New South Wales between the 7th of May and the 20th of June. Now, if you were to map every single algae event, even just blue-green algae in the same time period, whew, I wouldn't like to imagine what that looks like. Now, the blue-green algae is a symptom of the cause being increased nutrient input into the river system as well as increased sediment. Blue-green algae, as we've discussed, is a cyanobacteria. It can not only feed on waste, but it can also store that waste, and it can also photosynthesize just like an algae. It's incredibly it's incredibly it works on it takes advantage of a very bad environment in water quality. Okay,
So
it's
it's
very
advantageous
it's
and
advent yeah it's not
it
advantageous. Well, bad water quality environments are advantageous to it when that is not suitable for a lot of other species of life.
mm,
Yes. So you can see the varying intensities, either red, amber, or green. Now, as you can see, within the year, the river systems that flow into and out of the Murray and the Murray-Darling and the Darling increase in intensity, both intensity and number, just like we've been seeing over the years with fish kills, and also on a compounding basis on the left-hand side. It gets worse as it goes downstream. So does the blue-green algae. Now, again, it's very important to stress this data is just from 6 weeks in 1 year.
mm.
So you can clearly see the compounding effect of data that's taken in a 6 week period. What would be the compounding effect if we watched it on a yearly basis as the data was taken, as that data filled up over a period of before 1960 to 2019? I think we'd be shocked. So we can see again that the compounding effect of increased nutrients, sediment, and everything further produces an environment that is advantageous for blue-green algae to bloom and proliferate. And you can clearly see how it compounds as it goes downstream and how it, progressively gets worse. Now, again, only a 6 week period, so only a very small snapshot,
Exactly.
very
So,
small.
and once again, the algae itself is also a symptom, not the cause.
Exactly. It's the symptom. It's only going to grow if the conditions are right for it, and the conditions are right for it being an increased level of nitrate and phosphate and an increased level of sediment in the base of the river system or the water body that holds a lot of nutrient in what is called a nutrient sink. And it is also then constantly re-releasing nitrate and phosphate as well. So as the blue-green algae is taking up all the nitrate and phosphate in the water, nitrate and phosphate is coming out of this sludge in the bottom as well, and just further fueling the problem. So you've got to treat all the causes, not just one.
Yes.
You can dilute the nutrient by keeping more water in the river. Sure, on paper, it looks as less nitrate and phosphate in milligrams per liter of water, but you've still got the same amount of kilos of nitrate and phosphate going into the river system.
Yes,
Nothing's
and
changed
it's
there.
still a
The
poison
bulk of
well.
the bulk amount of nitrate and phosphate going in stays the same. It's just by adding 450 gigaliters or whatever it is that they tried to reclaim back to the river. Instead of it being at X concentration, it's now at Y concentration, which is 30% or 12% less than it was. But you've still got X amount of kilos of nitrate and phosphate in the water, and that number doesn't change. It's just
On a
manipulating the
percentage
numbers.
scale, it just looks nicer.
On paper, it looks nice. On paper, it looks nicer. Yeah. 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 Same thing happens with discharge limits in wastewater for farms and stuff. Same thing. Yeah. So in a nutshell, that's what those two graphs represent. And
Perfect.
it's very clear to see what's going on there.
Welcome back, everybody. We've got Gareth here at the helm again, and we're talking about what is the Australian government currently doing to help? Help what? Help the Murray-Darling River system. So take it away.
Thanks very much, Tony. So as discussed, all of our information that we have shown up until this point, and apart from our solution that we're proposing, is supported by information from the internet from the Australian government. So this is from nationalwatergrid.gov.au. Water is one of Australia's and the world's most important resources. We all rely on water to survive. It's crucial for our environment, our economy, and our livelihoods. So we need water to survive. We're 90% water. We need water. The Australian government is working with state and territory governments to invest in water projects that ensure the long-term viability of our communities and economy. Great. This sounds like, the direction that we're wanting to go, Tony. So the National Water Grid Fund, excuse me, is the Australian government's infrastructure investment program to improve water access and security by delivering nationally important water infrastructure projects that unlock potential, build resilience, and promote growth and sustainability. All very good things. I'm liking this. This includes investment in essential town water, dams, weirs, pipelines, water recycling and treatment plants, and other water storage, distribution, and scientific solutions. Brilliant. We support robust planning and responsible investment decisions that contribute to nature-positive outcomes, to provide safe and reliable water for regional and remote communities, to generate public benefit through responsible investment in water infrastructure for productive use, and build resilient water infrastructure that is environmentally sustainable and culturally responsive. All very good things. Now, where I am going to hand the expertise over to is to Tony. Tony has an MBA, and this is his wheelhouse: the business, the accounting, the money, the numbers, the math. It's all his wheelhouse. I've been talking a lot, and now it's Tony's turn, and he's going to break all this down for us. So strap yourselves in. Tony, tell us what we're looking at here.
So when we have a look at this, the overall picture of everything that sounds, from the National Water Grid Fund to, the Australian government working with states and territories, sounds wonderful, right? Everyone wants, safe, reliable water in regional communities, anything along the lines of, public benefits and resilient water infrastructure, like these sounds like, very,
They're all very hypey sort of terms.
very
yeah.
hypey, kind of buzzwordy, yeah.
Very well. I mean, just reading it there, like I said, I'm liking what I'm seeing. It's pretty much, as you'll see in the next slide and two, this is right down our alley. This sounds like exactly where we want to be at, to be suggesting the thing that we want to suggest to provide a solution for this. So that's why I was excited.
So this all sounds amazing, and that it's a forward motion. All right. But if we actually break this back down and we consider the timeline, okay, particularly from the Australian Academy of Science, all right, they have known about the condition of the Murray-Darling River system since the 1960s. All right, they have been collecting
the data. Yeah, the data shows that. Yes. Yeah.
All right, and that comes from their own institutes. It's all freely available information. All right, but somehow for the last 64 years, all of that has been continually shelved. All right, and now we're looking at pea soup. The river is green. Fish kills are increasing over and over and again. All right.
Blue-green algae blooms are increasing. All algae blooms are increasing. As you said,
Yeah,
pea soup, as well as blue-green algae and the rest of them. Yeah.
exactly.
And
So,
I keep banging on about that, but it is important to realize that blue-green algae is one species of literally tens of thousands, if not millions, of different species of algae.
mm,
And there's a lot of different sorts of algae that bloom in nutrient-rich water. It's not just blue-green. So it's very important because that's being not being recorded. So that's something that you need to consider because it happens everywhere.
yeah, exactly. So conditions are happening everywhere. All right. And what are we met with? We're met with a bureaucratic system that is clearly there to perpetuate itself. Okay. It has been passed off from government to government every term that they have an opportunity for the last 64 years. Now, is this the government that's going to do something about it? I don't know. Okay. But what I can tell you is specifically, if we have a look at the down the bottom here, we have from ABC News, the federal government changes and explained. Okay, well, let me explain. They've spent $13 billion since 2007. All right, that's $13 billion with a B. All right, of
Since
taxpayer money.
2007.
All right, which equals to
Okay.
$765 million per year for the last 17 years. Okay, what have we got from it?
Wow.
Okay, what that has resulted in is HD cameras being posted along the river. All right, so we can watch the river go to hell in a handbasket in high definition.
So at least we've got a front row seat to the fish kills, yeah?
All right, so along with that,
Wow.
okay, if we
Okay.
have a look at the publication, field trials to determine the efficacy of aeration to mitigate hypoxia in inland waterways.
Okay, that's
That,
exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Sounds like it's on the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is $200 million devoted to the CSIRO, all right, to run Venturi pumps off multiple sources of power. $200 million to run
The
Venturi pumps.
Venturi pumps.
Do you mind explaining for the viewers what the difference between a bottom aerator unit and a Venturi pump is?
So the Venturi effect is essentially it's a nozzle or an orifice that creates a difference between high pressure and low pressure. Okay, so high pressure being here, say your pump is pumping along this way, the high pressure is here, okay, reduced down to a nozzle. The low pressure is here on the outlet. And at this point right here, that difference in pressure is where air gets sucked in, okay? You've probably seen it on irrigation systems. You probably don't even know that they're called a Venturi if you don't have a lot of background knowledge on that particular type of units. Okay, they use them to inject they used to inject liquids and gases into gas or liquid. Either way, they use them a lot for irrigation and things like that
Mm-hmm.
because they're engineered a certain way to get a certain amount of airflow. Okay, what you need to operate a Venturi is a very high pressure, or at least a pressure to create a differential to get enough air suction. The higher that differential, the higher the difference between high pressure and low pressure, is the higher your air suction is. Okay,
All
so
right, so that what you're essentially saying is that a Venturi pump works very well in a closed loop system, not an open loop system like a river or a lake.
well, yes, but the other thing is what I'm trying to get to is it needs pressure to operate, so it needs water to be pumped through it to suck in the air to begin with, and they need to be at quite a high pressure. Now, to use water pressure to suck the air into the water instead of just using an air pump to pump air into the water, you need to use orders of magnitude more energy to get the same airflow.
Vastly more energy by the article that I read.
The other thing is that you then need to introduce that air correctly into the right spot to get the benefit of not only the air, but also the mixing, because the mixing, like we're talking about for destratification, is what we're trying to achieve here
Mm-hmm.
to then treat the bottom sediment as well. So if they're not, if you even if you are using a Venturi pump, you 10 steps behind the 8 ball in efficiency to begin with compared to diffused aeration. And then you add in the the need to introduce it in a way to actually get the secondary benefit, which is the circulation of the water. The amount of infrastructure that would be needed, as well as the amount of energy or fuel, would be, as I said, orders of magnitude higher than a simple diaphragm pump running a diffuser.
Okay,
To get,
so
yeah.
from the article that I read and the understanding the field trial itself, the Venturi pumps, as it was explained by the CSIRO, was that it was deemed unfit even after $200 million was thrown at it. Okay, and
Right.
a bunch of experts. All right, but they tried 3 different sources. Solar. All right, it required the size of a small solar farm to run each individual battery of Venturi pumps, a string of them,
Okay.
to
Yeah.
actually make a difference.
Okay. Yep.
All right.
That's obvious. Yeah.
The second option was tying it into the mains, but the power draw on the mains was such a great scale that it was just not feasible financially to pay for that amount of electricity to be running constantly for the Murray-Darling River system.
I mean, even a normal pool pump running on just a 50 millimeter Venturi, like a 2-inch Venturi, you're probably only going to get about 100 liters a minute of air draw for like a 2 kilowatt pump, and that running 24/7. That's a lot of energy.
That is.
And
That's 2
we're
kilowatts,
talking,
and you're running 24/7. You're talking about something that's easily 100 times larger.
yeah, okay, so right, okay,
All right. And then further, the final option that the CSIRO decided to explore was running these Venturi pumps off diesel, using an electric generator to be
okay.
powered
So
by a diesel motor. And
before I go any further, right? So they went from deeming that solar was not suitable because it needed the size of a small solar farm to the drain on the mains, and they thought that somehow diesel was going to be a better option. And we
well,
spent even more money on this.
yes, we did. Okay,
Okay.
and just to top it off, okay, finally with the diesel. All right,
Mm,
to top it off, the diesel to keep it operational 24/7 for a
mm.
single month, the amount of diesel needed is in the gigaliters.
Yeah.
Gigaliters of diesel.
So,
All right.
so after all of this, sorry, really, I honestly, I don't think I want to hear anymore. um, After all of this, what was their conclusion?
So their conclusion was that none of these things were viable.
Well, I could
All
have
right.
told you that right from the start as soon as you said Venturi.
Yeah. Okay. But to once finally top it off, coming full circle, they decided to do this Venturi pump test 100 meters from the actual Murray River system.
Right.
All right. Where they dug trenches to simulate the river. All
Mm.
right, which absolutely has no plant life, no ecology, no anything that actually mirrors anything to do with what is actually going on in the
So
river.
did they add sludge and
No,
emulate the
they
levels
dug a
of the
hole.
nutrients in it? Well,
Oh, they dug several holes
okay.
and filled them
So
with water.
if you're not at least emulating the environment that you're trying to remediate with the solution that you're testing, how are you going to test it if the environment's not the same? I mean, how are you going to, for start, how are you going to emulate over 64 years worth of sludge and nutrient input into a river, maybe with, compost in the bottom or something? It's possible to do with a bit of outside the box thinking,
Mm,
but you're just saying that they dug an earthen hole, filled it with water, and put a Venturi in it.
exactly, precisely. Like the article is right there.
Okay.
Feel free to read it. It is genuinely stunning
Um,
to see that this was green lit.
I don't mean to be blunt, but I think that's enough said. Just
All right. And to
wow.
yeah, wow. All right. To finally round this out, what we're going to have a quick gander at is the DCC EEW document for the Water Amendments Restoring Our Rivers 2023 FAQ. Okay, because this is an act that
Mm,
was passed in 2023. So like it or not, it is now the thing. All right.
okay.
Have we brought this up? Can we see this?
Yes, it is right there.
Wonderful. All right. So the focus here is that the basic implementation is how they will regain 450 gigaliters of water.
Okay.
All right. It says that it'll
Mm.
enhance the environment, minimize socioeconomic impacts, achieving value for money. All right. How this will happen: resilient rivers program, voluntary infrastructure projects, rule changes and partnerships, voluntary water purchases, purchase of water entitlements from willing sellers by the Commonwealth, sustainable community programs. All right. This to me, financially, is it's an act that makes water access for farmers much harder
Yeah,
than
that's
what they've previously lived. Okay, by
reading.
increasing the value of the water that they're already accessing, and if they
Yes,
do
yeah.
sell the water back to the Commonwealth, the value of the water that they will have to then extract to continue farming where they're farming will be exponentially higher. All right, but all the while, sorry, I'm just going to close this down now. All the while, the the answer to this is that they've come up with a financial solution to increase the value of access to water, making it difficult for those that are already there, all right, giving themselves a pat on the back while adding a further 450 gigaliters to the water, all right, which is
Mhm.
already a poisoned cup.
Okay,
It is
so
not a hands-on approach.
reading between the lines there, they want to buy back water to essentially lock it up so it's not being taken out of the river
Hmm.
from willing sellers, which, people that don't need it anymore, farmers that don't farm anymore, that have retired and want to sell their pumping rights or whatever it is, whatever it might be. That's no good for the next bloke that buys the property, but whatever. He's retired, he doesn't mind, I suppose. And so then they're buying it back, but that means they've then got control over that water right, that they can charge whatever price they want for it
Correct.
and sell it back. But
Yes.
that's all that's doing is just resulting in less water being taken out of the river, not treating the problem that's there. All that will do is just increase the volume in the river to dilute the problem slightly to buffer the numbers. That's all it's going to do.
That's right. And when they do buffer the numbers, they will pat themselves on the back a second time to say, hey, look what we did. We
Am I reading that
reduced
right
the
though?
number.
That's
Correct.
just that. I mean, okay, so this is a common thing in wastewater discharge. Okay,
For aquaculture farming.
aquaculture, wastewater, anything. They need to
Hmm.
not only do they need to know what your discharge volume is,
Hmm.
they need to know what the milligrams per liter will be in that discharge volume. And then they need an estimate of the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that you're going to discharge to the environment over a 12-month period. Okay. So even if you pump your required amount of volume that you're allowed to pump out, if your elevation of nitrogen and phosphorus exceeds um, your yearly
Limit.
production that you now have, you then need to pay more. Diluting it does nothing because the same amount of nitrogen and phosphorus still goes into the environment and it still ends up in the sea and in the ocean and everywhere else.
Yeah, but
So
ultimately, quickly in our
that's
rivers
doing
first.
nothing. Yeah, it's a literal, like, that's why they want all of the information when they give you a license, because it's whatever the first is to reach. So
Yes.
the amount in kilos of nitrogen and phosphorus that you discharge will stay the same.
Hmm.
The amount of waste and the amount of nutrient in the Murray-Darling is going to stay the same. It's just there's going to be a little bit more water in the river.
Exactly. They're adding a few drops of water to a poisoned cup.
Yeah, that's again,
And it's a
band-aids on
it's a
bullet holes.
bureaucratic it is a
It's not even a
bureaucratic
band-aid.
solution. It is a yeah, it is bullet holes. It is a bureaucratic solution to a physical problem. All right.
Okay.
They've written a beautiful document that outlines that no one's going to actually lift a finger to do something physical with the river itself. And when they did try, they tried a option that cost taxpayers $200 million while they're at it, right, to instantly nix it after running the program, going it's non-viable.
That was the Venturi pump trial.
Yes, without having looked overseas to see other companies that have successfully aerated their own rivers and their own
As
lakes.
as we'll go into in the next slide, this is not new technology. This is not a new concept. Okay, there
Yeah,
are
so
ways to optimize it, but yeah.
yeah, I'd like to jump over there if you don't mind, Gary.
Yep, let's go. Let's go to the next slide for sure.
Yeah, sweet. Booyah. Hands-on approach. What we want to do about it. Unleash. Go hell for leather, please.
Okay, so what we want to do about it, we want to treat the cause of the declining water quality that is impacting the environment, the aquatic environment, the Murray-Darling River. Okay, so from there's a couple of links there for you guys to look at. This in turn, okay. So what we want to do is we want to get rid of the bottom sludge, and we want to get rid of the nutrient. And getting rid of the bottom sludge will go a long way to getting rid of the nutrient, but you also need to supercharge the river in a way to uptake extra nutrient because we've artificially increased it. We just can't expect the river to cop it and catch up. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and 450 gigaliters added to the entirety of 2,500 kilometers worth of river is like a drop in the ocean.
Now, I'm not really good at math. This is why I use AI to do math. But if anyone wanted to calculate the length of 2,500 kilometers at an average width of 3 meters, with an average depth of sludge of, let's say, 3 to 4 centimeters. If someone can let me know how many millions of liters that is of sludge, you're not going to fix that. And that would be a conservative number. You're not going to fix that by just adding a little bit more water to the river. It's not going to do anything. We've seen many floods go through the river year in, year out, and it
And
doesn't
those
fix the
floods are
problem.
marginally larger than 450 gigaliters.
Yeah, added over a period of time. For the health of the system, yes. I mean, it was just the same as how they went through the Artesian Basin and capped off all the unused and abandoned bores, and it actually increased the pressure within the Artesian Basin, tenfold or something for other people. It makes sense to do, but still, it's not actually treating the cause, which is what we want to do. So this results in more water because it digests the bottom sludge on the bottom of the river and gains back the volume that is now taken up by all of the sludge that we've added over the last 64 years or more since colonisation of Australia. Okay, this then means better water quality. It means more life in the river. It means a healthier aquatic environment and better water for everyone and everything that utilizes the Murray-Darling River as a water source and the underground aquifers that connect to it. Now, that's very important because then, once we start talking about affecting the underground aquifers and things like that, things like increased salinity and stuff start to come into effect, and that's not good either. Okay, so the studies listed above, of which there were three, show further detail of the effects of not doing anything to support the natural environment. Essentially, we'll let you guys browse those at your leisure. I'll go through a few of these pictures here and explain what you're looking at. Okay, so when we talk about pea soup in an aquatic environment, we essentially mean water that looks like that top picture. You can't see through it. It's full of algae. You might be able to see fish swimming around in it but that there is, of the density that I see in hatcheries of people that are actually trying to grow algae with CO2 and heavy nutrient for, to feed to larval fish and things like this. So whether that's normal algae or blue-green, but that was happening at Menindee Lakes in 2021, that photo. And that's, well, it says a toxic algae bloom. I dare say there's a lot of different sorts of algae in there, but essentially you can see at that point during the day when the sun's shining, that water would be super saturated with oxygen, but you can see the density of that bloom at night when it happens,
And it
when that
respires.
algae starts to respire. So what happens is when algae is respiring, they're sucking out the oxygen. So, the fish and all the other life is suffocating because there's no oxygen available. Plus, it's pumping out a lot of CO2. Okay, so that's having a sedative effect on them as well, just like sitting in a car in the middle of winter with the windows up, you start to get tired and yawn because there's too much CO2 in the air, like in an office or anything, same sort of thing.
So what we're talking about ultimately, all right, in the simplest terms that I've been able to understand,
Yep.
is with this bottom picture and the
Hmm.
previous pictures before. Okay, but the bottom picture I think hits harder for me than
Yeah.
seeing hundreds of thousands. Okay, this is when you look at this bottom picture and then times it in orders of hundreds and thousands, it really
They're
starts to hit home. But what we're doing
yeah.
ultimately is drowning our fish.
Yeah.
Our fish
Well,
are drowning. That makes no sense.
well, we're choking them. We're suffocating them. Yeah. They
Yeah.
should be able to get the oxygen out of the water and they can't. Now, for anyone that wants a little bit of reference to how big the fish are in that picture, those cod, the one on the far left and the one on the right, not the one on the bank, the one in the water, those two cod there would be every bit of a meter long, if not more. That fish would be 25 to 40 kilos, probably.
Times that by a million.
Now, how much biomass is that in the river? Now, in the areas that aren't being monitored, if that happens, all of that fish and everything that goes back into the environment in one big dump, which once all the algae dies off and everything crashes and all these things start to break down, it then produces an environment that is totally uninhabitable because there's no oxygen in it whatsoever because everything's breaking down. So the microbes are going nuts, sucking all the oxygen out of the water. And it takes ages for it to recover. Ages. And all that,
And you
all,
can't eat it.
no.
You wouldn't want to eat it.
I mean, at the point where the fish is still alive, you wouldn't eat it because they've been swimming and swallowing and drinking the algae-laden water that's got the toxins in it. If it's a blue-green algae bloom, even if it's not a blue-green algae bloom, still wouldn't be eating it out of that water. No way. Mm-mm. Not
So
healthy.
what Gareth and I are
So
talking about is taking a hands-on approach.
exactly. So what we're seeing there is a symptom of the problem, both in the fish kills and the algae. So the algae is the first symptom. The fish kills is the ultimate, catastrophic result of what happens. It's not the cause though.
Hmm.
Even the hypoxia, which is the cause of the fish death, is still a symptom of the overall arching problem, which I alluded to a little bit there. But it's diffused aeration. Adding diffused aeration to the bottom of the river in multiple different places throughout the river would increase circulation, break down the bottom sludge, liberate the nutrient, kick the food web back into gear, and essentially start remediating it and treating the cause, which is one, the sludge in the bottom of the river that's built up over how many decades. That's a huge nutrient sink. So you have to get rid of that first and get the bacteria down on the bottom growing again so that they can start being the biological pump of the river again. Right now, they're completely smothered. They can't do anything. And with that, then excess levels of nutrient that do come into the system and excess sediment and sludge that does come into the system can then be digested, and the river can then digest it and process it, rather than it just sitting there and festering like a cesspool.
Well said, mate. Um, do we want to close it out, eh? So, folks, here we are. Thanks for hanging around if you've hung around to the end. Um, cheers, Gareth, for all your time and expertise, mate. It's been
Thanks very
smashing.
much, Tony. Thank
I've
you.
loved it. It's been very informative. Some things I never thought about, and it is a lot to think about. But
Oh,
for
I've learned a lot about the numbers and the funding and the connection of the various different government agencies that are dealing with this and the different parts that they're dealing with and who's focusing on what and driving what where.
Yeah, so folks, like
Which
before we get to the video stage, Gareth and I are, in the back rooms talking an awful lot about, how this all comes together. And part of that is if you see here on the right-hand side down the list, feel free, all these links will be available to you. Click and go,
we're going to put them in
enjoy.
we're going to put them in. This is just a summary correct of every single link that has occurred throughout the presentation. Yes.
Hmm. Yes.
So All this information is where we got our data from. So go
Yeah,
through,
don't
click.
take it for don't take it for us.
Don't take it from us. This is the information that the government has published, and
Mm,
we have collated it and interpreted it, and essentially diagnosed, the data.
yeah.
Not diagnosed, but yeah. So go through and at your leisure, we'll include this in the description of the
Yes.
video so that you can, go through and just click through, and then you can educate yourself and read about, the different parts of it, and that this isn't just at Menindee. Everyone knows about Menindee, but it's not just at Menindee.
Yeah.
There's
And if you have
tip
any
of the iceberg.
questions, if you have any financial questions, I'm happy to answer them. Any queries, if you have any bioaquatic questions, feel free to fire them off at Gareth. Like he's a whiz. I love it. Our,
Thanks.
our resident water wizard.
Thanks, man. Been called that a few times, yeah. Yeah, thanks very much, Tony. I've had a blast. This isn't the first lot of videos, obviously. This is just the summary of the first part. We haven't even shown you what we've got in store, really. We've told you what it is, but you
Yes,
we're going to go into the tech details. We're going to go into what it does, how it works, why it will work, and where we want to start, essentially. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for giving us your time for a start, because this is a massive issue. This is like the main artery of the country.
yeah.
Let's not sugarcoat that. Let's make that distinction right now. This is the main artery and lifeblood of at
Of
least New South Wales.
it feeds Australia's food bowl, and there's no denying that.
Especially the eastern states, which is where the majority of our population is. So it's just, it makes no sense to keep talking about it, and it makes sense to actually take some hands-on approach and action to it. And this is what we're proposing.